What's good with the YouTube? You already know. Big Flaco from a comics perspective. You already know what time it is, coming directly from the county jail, unfortunately. But my blessings, respects, and salutes to everybody out there, man. Because I'm going to keep on smashing, dashing, and sliding on through with a whole lot of energy. So please hit the like, subscribe, comment, do all those things to help support this channel. And hit that bell notification for future fire content. Anyways, we got a good one, guys. And this is the old school one. And like I said, this isn't all I'm doing is reading legal background facts to how the trial went and whatnot. I'm not putting my 2 cents whether these men are guilty or not. You know what I'm saying? That's not my position. I'm not a juror, and I'm not advocating or promoting either way. These are just the information that's gathered. And this is involving Medrano Ayala versus Chappelle, as you guys know, the Ayala brothers. And you're going to find someone who's been interviewed on my channel before, San Diego Gang Intelligence Detective Carlos Chacon. This is way back when he was working. He's retired now and does a lot of security work. And he's always had some interesting stories. But let's talk about this one right here. On April 26, 1985, Jose Rositas, Marcos Zamora, and Ernesto Dominguez Mendez were murdered execution style in an auto body shop located on 43rd Street in San Diego. Pedro Pete Castillo was shot at the same time, but not fatally. He claimed to have been intended fourth victim who got away. The 43rd Street body shop was a hub for drug distribution, and Dominguez was the owner. An active heroin distributor who may have had connections with heroin suppliers in Mexico. According to Castillo, street murders were a drug robbery gone wrong. The murders occurred around 8 p.m. Within a few hours, San Diego Gang Intelligence Detective Carlos Chacon urged his counterparts in San Diego Homicide Unit to investigate brothers Hector and Ronaldo Ayala and their associate Juan Manuel Mesa as potential suspects. 2 days later, Pete Castillo identified Ayala, Hector, and Joe Moreno as perpetrators of the triple homicide. Ayala was arrested in June of 1985. So this is way back in the days, man. This is how far back the Ayalas go. For 3 counts of murder, 1 count of attempted murder, 1 count of robbery, and 3 counts of attempted robbery. So if this would have been happening in the 2000s, they would have had this all with all kinds of gang enhancements, and they would have had a lot more people indicted under subindictments, I guarantee you, right? But this is 1985. The laws were a little bit different, and they weren't as strict. I was arrested in June of 1985 and charged with 3 counts of 1 murder, right? Okay, hold on, I just said that. Excuse me, guys. Hector and Joe Moreno were arrested around the same time. Now, in February 1987, San Diego police officers arrested Juan Manuel Mesa for drug distribution. Mesa pleaded guilty to possession of cocaine several weeks after his arrest and entered into a plea agreement that provided he would serve 4 years in prison. Detective Chacon, who knew Mesa from childhood, visited Mesa in jail several times during the spring of 1987. And see, I remember doing an interview, guys. If you haven't seen it with Charles Chacon, we did 2 of them. One on our live and one that was on the regular ACP channel. And he has some interesting stories, man. He used to talk about how easy it was to turn these guys that were either mobsters or either, you know what I'm saying, NF. And he had a relationship that his sister was related to his sister was dating one of the his brother, I believe, was dating Babo Sosa's sister. So he was related to Babo Sosa, believe it or not. And I always found that kind of interesting. Anyways, Detective Chacon, who knew Mesa from childhood, visited Mesa in jail several times during the spring of '87. Mesa admitted to Chacon that he helped the Ayalas plan the 43rd Street murders. Even though he ultimately did not participate, Mesa met with the district attorneys involved in the Ayalas case in April or May of 1987 and agreed to testify against Ayala, Hector, and Moreno. In the summer of 1987, a district attorney appeared at Mesa's sentencing in a drug possession charge. The DA asked the judge to send Mesa pursuant so he could recall the sentence and commitment previously ordered and resent the defendant. If Mesa testified in court proceedings related to the 43rd Street murders. Interesting, guys, so far. There's still a whole lot we have to go through, guys. Now, Hector and Ayala and Hector were believed to be members of the Mexican Mafia, or MA, a prison gang with an active street program that operated throughout Southern California, but all parties agreed that the 43rd Street murders were not gang-related. Interesting. Ayala's lawyers filed a pretrial motion and Lamine, in which they argued that the mention of the Mexican Mafia or Ayala's gang affiliation at trial would be unduly prejudicial and of questionable relevance to the case. I find that interesting. You know, I think nowadays, if this would have got put in front of a judge, they probably wouldn't dismiss it because there's too much information, right, that pertains certain alleged activities to, you know, the Ayala brothers. I mean, there's still dudes that have been indicted in San Diego recently that they were allegedly had contacts with the Ayalas, and what I found interesting was since the Ayala brothers are already on death row, they didn't get indicted. And this is recently, like in the last 2 years. I think I did a video on it. Anyways, for them not to bring up the Mexican Mafia connection is big. Like I said, and you got to wonder, is this personal? You know, was this a personal situation? Did they even commit these crimes? Or was it even for the benefit of the inmate? And this is at a time, like I said, when both organizations didn't have their hand on the street activities like they do today. Where everybody's paying taxes. The harsh taxes didn't come until later. They've always been taxing drug dealers to a certain extent, but a lot of times, you know, as long as you got your fix and your little kick, a lot of dudes were able to fucking kind of borderline freelance because they had the protection of either the NF or MA at the time. Anyways, the state trial judge was initially disinclined, to rule on the motion. He agreed with prosecution that it would be difficult to rule the admissibility of gang affiliation evidence before hearing each witness's testimony. The defense team pursued this pretrial ruling for months. So basically, this is what they had to do, and they went under it. Gang affiliation has nothing to do with identity issues that were present. So there will be no Mexican Mafia testimony concerning gang affiliation. This is what this whole app's about. Okay. The prosecution, though, this is what they discussed, and this was a state case, guys. Ayala's trial began in August of 1988. Lasted 2 months. The prosecution theorized that the murders resulted from a robbery attempt that failed because it was based on the perpetrator's incorrect speculation that Dominguez had just returned from Mexico with a quantity of narcotics. The state presented minimal physical evidence linking Ayala to the crimes and instead built its cases around testimony of Pete Castillo and Juan Manuel Mesa. Castillo testified that Dominguez and Zamora sold heroin from the shop and that he was also involved in the heroin distribution operation. He described Ayala and Hector frequent the shop to use and acquire heroin. Like I said, this is a time period when a lot of these were just getting their fixes. You know, it wasn't like the changes when they started having the meetings and they started having the list tax people. It was a time period when each member, whether you were MA, NF, were basically freelancing. Whether you're working with a regiment or not, you didn't have foot soldiers doing your work back then. I've said this time and time again. That's what fucked up the whole indictments in San Jose was the main perpetrators of all those crimes of that alleged indictment were all made members or associates of the regiment. Therefore, basically everybody got fucked, you know? And so nowadays, people that join these organizations and that have power, if they're already doing life, they're never going to see the streets again, so they're not worried about it. But when you have made members or associates out there, they're going to do your bidding. They're going to do your dirty work out there. Back in the days, it wasn't like that. You stepped out to the streets and you were a fucking made member, you were a treacherous individual, whether you were fucking a cardinal for the MA or for the NF. Okay? Anyways, let's go on to the skin. He described how Ayala and they frequented the shop. We already talked about that on the day of the murders. Castillo looked up from his work on the car and saw Hector point a pistol at his head. Hector led Castillo into the shop where Dominguez, Zamora, and Rositas were bound by duct tape. Castillo testified that Ayala demanded $10,000 from the victims or someone's gonna die. $10,000, guys. Castillo volunteered that he had some money in the trunk, and Ayala agreed to lead him there. Castillo used the opportunity to escape. He lifted the large shop door, slid under it, and let it slam down behind him. As he ran into the street, someone like Ayala or Moreno fired shots at him. Castillo was wounded in the back. Castillo fell onto the 43rd Street where police officers found him and rushed him to the hospital. And that's the thing, right? Whenever you're in a situation where the Sigma boys come, you know, and they come to mean business, and you're dealing with people who are known to put in work and catch bodies, if you get a chance to get away, you got to take all opportunity to get away. You can't put yourself in any further risk by going with the flow. You know what I mean? It's either do or die at times. There's some people who don't really have, you know what I'm saying, not everybody is capable of always what you call pulling the trigger. I mean, no, not everybody is capable of doing it. Are they physically capable? Yes. But not everybody is willing to just do it. Sometimes they just rather try to do a decoy move, jack somebody, and move on. But when you're dealing with treacherous individuals of this magnitude, trust me, the lifestyle changes and the mentality changes. This is when people start getting their families shot up. This is when people start having their family members snatched up. And this is when a whole lot of things start to go, especially when you're on that border. You have a lot of room to wiggle and do shit. Anyways, as this happened, he was rushed into the hospital. They found him. Castillo did not immediately identify the Ayala or Joe Moreno as the perpetrators to the crime. Rather, while on ambulance on the way to the hospital, he said he did not know the killers, that one of them was wearing a red plaid shirt. The next day at the hospital, Castillo repeated that one of the killers was wearing a red Pendleton shirt when he was interviewed by detectives. But the day after, Castillo identified the Ayalas and Joe Moreno as the killers and also picked them out of a photo array. In addition, let me get to this, guys, real quick. In addition to providing an eyewitness account of the crimes, Castillo's testimony corroborated the prosecution's theory of the case. See, that's what they did right here, guys, is they basically got, the witnesses to corroborate the direction and what the prosecution's theories was of the case. Whenever there's a murder case, and this is probably why they didn't bring up the gang affiliations, or didn't need to, you have to have a motive. And because this is premeditated, you can already tell. There was already guesses that they were going to die. There was force for money, and unfortunately, people died. Not everybody's going to go in there to do a lick and decide to leave witnesses, especially when people are playing for keeps. Anyways, let me go down a little bit more what the defense talked about, because we already know what the prosecutor's position is. The defense presented evidence that Castillo was in league with probable actual killers, two young Latin men, one of whom was wearing a red plaid shirt or a Pendleton. So this is when people try to consider what you call hoodwink. You guys ever heard what hoodwink means? Hoodwink means where someone tries to fucking sit there, they were involved in the crime, and then they try to pass it off to somebody else, and potentially it works, sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes the defense will use this as well. Unfortunately for the Ayalas, it didn't work. Now, Ayala's trial counsel offered the testimony of Tracy Pittman in support of the defense alternative assault theory. Pittman testified that on the night of the murders, she was at a liquor store across 43th Street and a young Mexican man wearing a Pendleton-type shirt walked past her. She thought he was concealing something that could have been a gun. Pittman said the Mexican man was joined by a second man, Mexican-looking man, and the two disappeared into the complex containing the body shop. 2 minutes later, Pittman heard gunshots, saw a man, presumably Castillo, running from the body shop, and then heard several more shots. So, I see where they're going with it. This would be interesting. Can you imagine if these dudes were doing all this time and this dude just pretty much got over on them and pretty much was involved in this hit? And, probably was already getting pressed up by the Ayalas or probably had a personal vendetta or issue and was pretty much, we already know that these men were not really high on the detectives in San Diego's fucking list as good citizens, so I can see someone trying to corroborate a story, and, law enforcement may run with it, I like the defense's position that they tried, but apparently it didn't work. Now, they also called another witness, Rafael Mendoza Lopez, Rafa. Rafa was a longtime friend of Dominguez who frequented the body shop to purchase drugs. On direct examination, Rafa testified that he went to the body shop on the day of the murders to get heroin from Castillo, and he saw several strangers whom he perceived to be from Mexico. Rafa testified that he did not see the Ayalas at the shop that day. Rafa described standing next to Castillo when Castillo opened the trunk of a car and took out two guns that were buried in a pile of dirty clothes. Rafa recalled Castillo telling him that he was waiting for some people from Mexico. Wow, this is getting a little interesting right here. Okay, the defense endeavored to weaken the state's case by impeaching its primary witness, Castillo Mesa. So, they filed a countermotion to try to suppress impeaching their statements as far as Castillo and Mesa, saying that they basically have other witnesses that, counter what they're saying. Counsel cross-examined Castillo by his role in the body shop distribution business and false statements he made during preliminary hearing in which he denied any knowledge of drug-related activity at the body shop. The defense emphasized that Castillo did not initially identify Ayala as a killer, but rather said the killer was a stranger wearing a red Pendleton shirt. Counsel impeached Mesa with the fact that he was testifying in the hope of getting his sentence reduced. So Mesa actually got his witness testimony impeached because he was only out to get out. He had a lot of inconsistencies to his story. It took more than a year for him to come forward. And the meetings he had with Chacon before he decided to testify, and a statement he made to parole officers in which he admitted he had propensity for lying. Okay, I'm going to go through a little bit of this brief, but this stuff's kind of interesting. It does bring in Detective Carlos Chacon's part. I'm going to go into that, yes, but let me see. State's rebuttal, though. Rockwood dramatically recounted his testimony in a prosecutional rebuttal. Called back to the witness stand, he told the jury he invented the story about Castillo taking guns from the trunk of the car and commenting about waiting for people from Mexico. He also admitted, contrary to earlier account, that he did see the Ayala's at the body shop late in the afternoon on the day of the murders. So that right there, this is 1975. This is a different time area in California. It's a different time era in the system, and it's a different time era with police. And you kind of question why would someone go from, telling this all information to all of a sudden testifying that, what I'm saying, that this was asked of them to do. He said that he lied on Ayala's behalf. Rafa testified that he did it because Ayala asked him to, and because he was afraid that if he refused to help the Ayalas, he might, get killed or something. According to Rafa, Ayala asked him to testify for the defense at a jailhouse visit that occurred shortly after Ayala's arrest in the summer of 1985. Rafa explained that Ayala pressed a piece of paper against the visiting room glass separator. A handwritten note on the paper instructed Rafa to get in touch with the defense investigators and tell them that the Ayalas weren't at the shop that day. And so this is just like when Corny and Pinky and Skip and all them were in Santa Rita, more so Corny and Pinky and Tibbs. When the communications would go, a lot of people would go visit someone like Skip or Goose or someone like that, someone that was more of a lonely ranking member, and the instructions would come out the same way on written papers. They would always request different visitors, and this is how they would convey instructions. They would establish certain codes, and the codes would change. Therefore, there was no way to infiltrate it, and there was always different people that were taking up visits. Anyways, I'm going to go into Detective Chacon's decision on this, as far as his position. Excuse me. Detective Carlos Chacon testified only briefly at trial, but Ayala argues that Chacon played a significant behind-the-scenes role in this case. Chacon was a San Diego gang intelligence officer whose regular duties required that he gather intelligence about prison gangs operating in Southern California, including the Mexican Mafia. Chacon had pre-trial contact with several witnesses in Ayala's trial. In addition to meeting with Rafa just before he agreed to recant the testimony he gave on Ayala's behalf, Chacon visited Juan Mesa after Mesa's February 1987 drug arrest, and the two discussed the 43th Street murders. Mesa was a Mexican Mafia affiliate who spent much of the decade between 1975 and 85 in prison. Chacon was well acquainted with Mesa because the two grew up in the same neighborhood. Chacon frequently visited Mesa in jail to elicit information about gangs. Several weeks after one such visit, Mesa admitted to his involvement in planning the 43th Street murder, and several months after that agreed to testify against the Ayalas. All right, guys, man, I hope you guys find this interesting. I don't really have too much information. They ended up sentencing the Ayala brothers to death in early January 1989, and this is where they exist to this day. Hopefully they get a chance in the future at freedom. With that said, your boy Flaco from ACP, I'm out.